Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystem globally, including from data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology and data center facilities related companies. And then there's the whole construction, real estate, and investment part of the ecosystem that brings all the capital and all the land and power and everything that's super critical to make this period of hockey stick growth continue on a global basis. And then there is the fifth part of the ecosystem, the outsourced sales and marketing companies. And data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A is for you regardless of where you sit on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of sales, like as an account executive or sales development or business development rep, or perhaps in the post-purchase, the account management or client success kind of role, or sales engineering or solutions engineering, something related to pre or post sales. Or maybe you do something related to marketing, perhaps in event marketing, field marketing, social media, content, demand generation, brand, product marketing. Or speaking of product, maybe you work in some kind of product management capacity or innovation capacity. I've hosted some fantastic interviews on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast with product leaders and innovation leaders throughout the global data center ecosystem. And if your company has an indirect model, maybe you and your team members are responsible for channel partnerships, which for an operator or a technology company might be like with VARs, value-added resellers, or managed service providers, integrators, master agents. Or if you're located within facilities or construction or real estate, you have your channel partners as well. And maybe you are the executive sponsor whose job it is to go and recruit the best and the brightest to join your company, to join your team, to give it the support to propel it up to the next level of growth, and making sure that you have the right people in the right seats, rowing the boats at just the right speed, playing their musical instruments at the exact time, at the right tempo, following the beats to bring all of this together. Orchestration, as they call it throughout a lot of the technology-centric parts of the data center ecosystem. But regardless of what your company does, regardless of what you do, if you are all in on taking your impact, your team's impact, your company's impact to the next level in the global data center ecosystem, you are for sure in the right place. If you want to make sure that you get invited to upcoming educational events just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for today? First up, we're going to talk about how to get a steady flow of data center clients. After that, we'll look at how to overcome new data center technology resistance. We're all in the transformation business. We're all in the business of change and educating and building trust. So how do you promote, how do you overcome that technology resistance? Then we'll look at how to improve your data center sales cycle and procurement timelines. Following that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk all about how to target hyperscalers or larger clients, and particularly finding deals with those hyperscalers and larger clients. Then we'll turn our attention to how to set up data center meetings with potential clients. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll get into how this is a great one. AI, how a data center co-location business can add AI as a service. I'll leave it to you to figure out when it comes to all of the AAS, like software as a service, unified communications as a service, platform as a service, how you're going to come up with the acronym for AI as a service. But yeah, the particular challenging question is, how does a data center co-location business get into that as a business, offering AI as a productized service to or subscription to their clients. If you have an idea for a topic or a challenge or a question that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we will add that to the consideration set for an upcoming show. And by the way, if this is your first time joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, I want to wish you a very warm welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us, and we would love to know what you do and what your company does within the data center ecosystem. Drop that into the comments. And if you've been with us before, if this is your second time or you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us as well. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, this one actually crosses throughout the full ecosystem. How do we get a steady flow of data center clients? That is a terrific question and a great place to start. And what's super important to keep in mind is if we're looking to get a steady flow of clients, we need to be very aware of how our prospects, how our future clients now research and make their purchase decisions, not how they used to do it, but how they do it today. But in order to understand how they're doing it today, it's worth a few moments of review, just going back to understand how we would have addressed that question if we were talking about this 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, in the relatively early days of search engine adoption, mobile device adoption, cloud adoption, it was getting fairly widespread, right? 10, 15 years ago, you could count on the fact that your typical IT decision maker, engineering decision maker, construction decision maker, regardless of what their role is throughout the data center ecosystem, they were getting to the point that they were pretty comfortable using their smartphone quite often. They were constantly looking for information, for answers on Google. They were asking their friends and colleagues for advice on LinkedIn. They were attending webinars. They were listening to podcasts. They were watching videos. And most of your buyer personas throughout the data center ecosystem are still continuing to do all of that. However, there's been some changes. Now, back then, even when they were engaging in a lot of those habits, a lot of those preferences for how they research and made their purchase decisions, you could align your playbook reasonably well and count on the fact that if you did most of the right things, if you were client-centric, you could count on the fact that most of your prospects and potential clients would be ready to talk with someone from your sales team when they were about halfway through their journey, about halfway through your sales cycle. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, did research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions, that's now part of Forrester, and found that roughly 56, 57% of a typical journey was happening self-service, and the balance, 43, 44%, was happening with you. Meaning that they would do all of this research, they'd watch all these videos, they'd go to all these review websites, they'd listen to these webinars, they'd ask questions on LinkedIn or whatever other channel they were using to query to ask for advice from their peers. And they'd get to the point that they were a little past the halfway point and they'd be like, okay, I've taken this as far as I can on my own. Yeah, I'll book the demo. Yeah, I'll schedule the tour. Yeah, I'll fill out the form to talk to sales. And they would show up and you'd get to spend roughly half of that journey with them. And you could, because you were spending roughly half of that journey, you could have a lot more impact on how they viewed the different choices that are in front of them. That 56, 57% number where you were almost in there for a little less than half of the journey is now, unfortunately, a point of nostalgia. It's very much in the rearview mirror. 10 years of digital transformation, millions of baby boomers retiring, a lot more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, tens of millions of people that got used to working from home and remote and hybrid kind of roles at the start of the 2020s. And that 56% number has jumped all the way to 83%. And it's continuing to accelerate to the right, meaning that the self-driven buyer's journey, where they're doing a ton of research before they get to you, is now the predominant buyer journey among nearly all ideal client profiles, among nearly all buyer personas that are relevant for nearly all of the global data center ecosystem, which means your prospects, your clients are coming to you so much better educated, so much more up to speed on your category than they were as recently as 10 years ago, that it's starting to marginalize some of the more entry junior level members of your team. The bigger issue, though, is all of this is accelerated in the last 2, 3, 4 years because of one big change. I'll give you a clue. It's a 2-letter word, AI. Why has AI made such a big change? Of course, we know that AI is fueling massive amounts of capital investment throughout the global digital infrastructure ecosystem, starting with NVIDIA and working its way on down. It's lifting all of this really started, if you think about the origin of all this acceleration, when OpenAI, when ChatGPT came out of beta, and it's inspired Copilot and Gemini and Claude and Perplexity and Grok. And as these large language models continue to keep getting better, the chat apps that are on our phones and that we use on our desktop have gotten so good that a lot of you and a lot of your prospects and a lot of your future clients are having a lot more conversations with their chat apps. Having so many of those conversations that in many cases, they're turning to ChatGPT and Copilot and those other handful of related apps instead of talking to a human. And this is making it kind of challenging. Okay, a lot challenging for go-to-market teams throughout the global data center ecosystem that are using the exact same playbook that they've used 10 years ago. But it doesn't have to be a deer in headlights moment that existentially disrupts your career. It's also a huge opportunity because the individuals, the teams, the companies that are triumphing in this moment aren't just coasting on fumes on having the biggest brand in their segment. Because the reality is, if you work for a Fortune 500 company, you're somewhat immune to this because you have the massive halo protection of billions or trillions in brand equity that you can lean on. There's other challenges, and there's still competition for attention. And that's what's causing a lot more fragmentation and segmentation in the marketplace. But for everyone else, the other 95% of those that are tuning into the show, there's a much more deer in the headlights moment of realizing that you are in competition for attention, not just with search engines and social media and YouTube and podcasts and webinars. You're in competition for attention with all of the self-service experiences that your prospects and clients are getting from the generative AI apps that are fueling the massive amounts of growth throughout the data center ecosystem. Which means that in order for you to earn your way in early and often, which is incredibly important to staying relevant in that self-driven buyer's journey, they have to see you as more helpful than the app. If they do not see you as more helpful than the app, why are they going to talk to you? Do they need you to read them the website? Do they need you to click the play button on the explainer video on the homepage? Do they need you to read them the Google slides or the Canva slides or whatever it is, the deck? No, of course not. They need your help to figure things out. But if you can't figure things out better than they can with the self-service tools, you will continue to struggle and tread water. And that's not really a comfortable place to be. But there is a much, much better playbook for this, but it requires a pretty massive cultural change for a lot of companies throughout the data center ecosystem that are clinging way too complacently, way too tightly to the now long obsolete sales and marketing dinosaur playbook from 10 years ago. In order to turn the corner, in order to effectively earn your way back in early and often, so you not just have a role in that last 17%, but have a role in the full 100%, it requires a pretty big shift in mindset to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box. And from a practical standpoint, what that means is like account executives, sales development reps, marketers, channel managers, account managers, you really don't want to position yourself by those job titles anymore. What's way more effective is positioning yourself as a teacher, a consultant, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, a thought leader. Trust is a huge, huge part of that. And in order for you to be able to earn your way in early and earn your way in often, to have a role in as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, it is very, very well advised to think of yourself being more in the learning and development and professional development business and less in the selling business. That's how companies are triumphing. That's how companies are getting their teams to continue to stay relevant, is recognizing that as incredibly cynical, as incredibly skeptical as your ideal buyers, as your targeted, as your prioritized buyer personas are. And let's be frank, going back 5 or 10 years, they're not big fans of sales and marketing. And the more technical they are, the more highly educated they are, the less they're big fans of sales and marketing. In many cases, they don't even like hanging out with the sales and marketing people from their own companies. So how do we earn our way in early and often? We need to get incredibly focused on who they are and what's going on in their world. So that client centricity is no longer optional. It is the only way you're going to get back in. So if we're super specific on our ideal client profile, we know at the company level where they're located, how big or small their companies are, the industries that they're located within. That helps us build our target account list. So we know what's going on at the company level. We know what's going on at the account level. But we know companies don't buy. Individuals within those companies are the ones that show up on decision committees. And let's call it for what it is. It's not a decision maker anymore. It's a decision committee. Because even if you get the red carpet rolled out with the decision maker, everyone is so ridiculously risk averse that the CEO is going to say, did you meet with my team? You meet with my team? What are you wasting my time for? Go back and meet with my team. You get consensus among my team, then we'll talk about moving forward. So when that happens, you realize that there is very much a decision committee. And one of the most effective ways to earn your way in early and often with that particular account is to one by one educate and build trust with the individual stakeholders on that decision committee. The problem is, no matter how good the marketing technology and sales technology and prospecting tools have gotten, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn Sales Navigator, but it can only take it so far when it comes to identifying who the decision makers are. The reality is there are hidden decision makers in nearly every mid-market and enterprise deal. And as good as you are at sleuthing out who's on that decision committee, I can tell you without a doubt, the hidden decision makers are better at playing hide and seek with you, and they don't want to be sought. They don't want you to even know that they exist. How do we earn our way onto their radar screen? It's almost always going to be thought leadership, but it starts with getting incredibly client-centric with the visible buyers that we know about. And from the visible buyers that we know about, especially the primary and secondary personas that are the most and second most impactful economic decision takers on the decision-making stakeholders on that committee, we have to absolutely positively know their biggest goals that they're working on and their challenges that they're struggling with most in their own words. Not what we think the words are, but what the words actually are. And getting the words right is the key to having a website that resonates, email marketing that resonates, an event strategy that resonates, social posts, digital ads. Everything will fall flat and be largely ignored if you skip that step. It is incredibly important to figure out who they are, what's going on in their world in their own words. And when we get to the point that we have 5 or 10 big goals and challenges, we have 10 or 12 topics for each of our first and second most important segments. Each of those segments, I would encourage you to think about having your own events series that educates and builds trust, that destigmatizes, that gets you out of the vendor box and allows your sales and marketing, your client-facing team members to show up and look a lot more like consultants, teachers, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and perhaps even thought leaders. But in order for us to earn our way in, no one's coming to hang out with you for a 60-minute infomercial. They don't want to drive over to your place. They don't want to log onto your webinar for you to basically run QVC and for you to basically pitch them nonstop for 45 minutes to an hour. But they still need to learn. They still need to learn valuable skills and best practices about how others and similar companies to theirs and similar job functions to theirs are achieving their biggest professional goals and overcoming some of their biggest professional challenges. And to the extent that you can be a conduit of that incredibly valuable information, those educational experiences, you will earn your way in early and often, educating and building trust, one decision-making committee member at a time. Now, how do we get to other people on the decision-making committee? Well, we don't just invite one person from these job functions. We invite the whole department. We invite the whole team as much as we can see them. So for example, let's say you have 100 people, 100 companies on your target account list, and in aggregate, there's 1,500 people in IT functions in these 100 companies, or 15,000 people in IT functions in these companies. We invite them all, and we see who the title of the event resonates with most, the headline on the landing page. And if you did your job well with your customer insight research and you figured out their 5 or 6 big goals and their 5 or 6 big challenges, and one by one, you're tackling those each month in a monthly breakfast seminar series, a monthly lunch and learn series, a monthly webinar series, your topic should resonate with a significant amount of those people. And they'll register and they'll attend. And when you send back the message that says, gee, when it comes to cybersecurity best practices for mid-market manufacturing firms, it's truly multidisciplinary. It's a team effort. It takes a village. There's usually people involved from infrastructure, from operations, from cybersecurity, from compliance, from finance. So with that in mind, who else from your team, who else from other parts of your company would benefit from attending? Hit the forward button, add a thought or two, and you'll know that this is working. By the way, that's a marketing technology, email marketing strategy that you've been able to do for 20 years. No AI required. You'd be shocked how few people are actually doing that. It takes like 15, 20 minutes to set up once. And then when you repeat the series, it takes a couple minutes to maintain and manage that. And you'll know it's working because you start to notice 3, 4, 5 people from the same company registering together within a few minutes of each other. Teams that learn together, grow together. And what you're doing that's incredibly powerful is you're proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of the buyer's journey. Talk about with kids, with teens, with adolescents, they go through their formative years where you can shape their values, you can shape their behaviors, you can model them to be the grown-up that you want them to grow into. Well, your prospects, your early stage future clients go through the exact same thing in the early and the middle stages of the buyer's journey. If you're the one, if your team are the ones that earn your way in early and often, you have a tremendous opportunity, a tremendous amount of power to shape how they navigate the different choices that are in your category. You can share all the best practices and methodologies that you use to train your internal team members. And when this works well, they go back to their teams and they're quoting you. They're using your matrix, they're using your checklist, they're using your tools to shape the entire initiative. And when it comes to part 2 and part 3 and part 4 in the breakfast seminar or lunch and learn or webinar series, guess what you start to notice from the same companies? There was 5 people that registered part 1, 8 people registered for part 2. And by part 3, they're telling you, well, maybe instead of everyone coming to your event, why don't you just come to we're having an offsite next month. Why don't you just come in for a half hour and do a custom version of that for us? Wow, you want to talk about foot in the door. You want to talk about getting the inside track about what's really, really going on. But this all starts with recognizing that locking yourself up in a vendor box, a 10 by 10 piece of carpeting that you pay tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to be locked up in that vendor box in a big expo hall is not serving you well. It's accelerating your commoditization. And because of that, the prospects and clients that you need to be creating awareness and educating and building trust with, it's not helping your cause. What's incredibly important is getting your prospects and clients to see you more as experts, as opposed to an undifferentiated, commoditized, bottom of the barrel. I mean, where this usually has to start with is someone at the most senior executive level of your company. And depending on your company size, if you have a couple dozen or a few hundred people in your company, this goes all the way to the CEO. If you're part of a multinational company, it's probably your division VP or division managing director or something like that. Someone with a significant position of authority over your go-to-market strategy and go-to-market budget needs to say, you know what? We're fed up with our prospects and our clients treating our team members like crap. We're tired of being ghosted. We're tired of the condescension. We're tired of them lying to us. We're tired of all of this nonsense. We're better than that. We have some of the smartest people on the planet, and it is time to let the industry know exactly who we are, what we stand for, and how we can help them. And we don't need gatekeepers. We don't need to pay the toll takers. We're going to go directly to our ideal clients. We're going to go directly to our prioritized buyer personas, and we are going to have the best client education, partner education, prospect education on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do directly and indirectly with our category. That's a leading indicator that someone's going to be in market for our product or service in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and in the coming months. And we're going to play the long game, and we're going to recognize that building a brand today is about way more than aesthetics. It's not something that should be locked up in a safe with your creative director who has a PhD in Adobe Creative Suite. No, it's way more than just fonts and hexadecimal codes and logos. Your brand is now everything that the marketplace says about your company when you are not in the room. And given that you are locked out of the room for the first 83% of the journey, if you don't figure out a way to educate and build trust, you start to realize that, holy, this is the existential moment. We're either going to step up and we're going to be the ones that are doing all of the teaching, that are going to be doing all the consulting, that are going to be doing all the educating, that are earning all the trust, or we're going to get buried. We're going to be haggled down to nothing. We're going to be chasing being the lowest bid all the time, to the point where our client attrition is off the charts, our financial status is cratering, we're losing the best and the brightest to other companies. This isn't the way we want to be. We want to be out in front, taking strong leadership in our segment. And the way that we do that in a self-driven buyer's journey is to educate and build trust. And when it comes to having a steady flow of clients and generating leads among the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, we need to get incredibly precise about our ideal client profile so we know geographically exactly where they're located, because that has a massive impact on whether we spend more on owned events in person or we do owned events digitally, or a mix of the two. If your ideal client profile tells you that a significant percentage of your prospects and clients can get in the car or get in the Uber, get in public transportation and get to one or more of your facilities in a 30 or 60-minute drive, I want you to make a significant effort over the next 12 months to every single month invite a couple hundred, invite a couple thousand people to come learn with your client-facing team members. And the key thing that messes a lot of people up is you do not need big numbers to make this work. Unfortunately, a lot of people in this industry have been brainwashed into thinking that they need to be in front of a room with thousands of people, 87%, 97% of which are nowhere near their ideal client profile, for marketing and branding to actually work. The reality is there is so much gross negligence when it comes to conference selection, when it comes to ecosystem selection. If you would just take the media kit on the left-hand side of the screen and put your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas on the right-hand side of the screen, it becomes super obvious. We want you to be investing your time and resources where you have a chance to win, where it's not salespeople hanging out with other salespeople, vendors pitching other vendors. No, you largely want your client-facing team members to be spending time with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So first, it's becoming a lot more vigilant about picking the right ecosystems, picking the right conferences, picking the right events. You do not need to be in front of thousands of people unless you happen to have a company that has hundreds of thousands of employees and you have an outrageously large addressable market. For most companies in this ecosystem that have a couple dozen or a couple hundred employees, maybe even a couple thousand employees, there likely is a lot more precision that goes into building your target account list. And the cool part is, when it comes to hosting your events, which again, 15 or 20 of the perfect people sitting in your conference room, sitting in your classroom, a couple dozen people hanging out on your webinar that are the perfect people from your target accounts, is so much more impactful than going to an event where 87%, 97% of the people there aren't even remotely near your ideal client profile. And that, like, when you can't control the agenda, when you're not in the top 3% of people attending that event and you don't get to educate and build trust, what are you actually doing there? Trying to bribe people to get them to spend a few minutes with you? That's not educating and building trust. Anyone that's remotely technical, that's anti-sales, highly skeptical, highly cynical, sees through it right away. If you want to earn their respect, it's through the learning and development, professional development door. And for everyone but the top 3% of people that attend conferences, it's so much more effective and so much more cost effective for you to run small, incredibly targeted events where you control exactly who gets invited, you control exactly what's on the agenda, and you basically own the show, you run the show. And again, if there's a prioritize, let's use a co-location company, for example. A typical co-location facility is a conference room that sits 15 or 20 people. What I would encourage you to do is take that conference room and every Wednesday morning, for the next 10, 12 months, first Wednesday of the month, second Wednesday of the month, I want you to fill that conference room up with the perfect people from your target accounts, one buyer persona at a time. So let's say the first Wednesday of the month is all about your primary buyer persona, which in the case of co-location operator may be IT executives. Your secondary buyer persona may be channel partners like managed service providers. Maybe there's a tertiary buyer persona if you have a strong niche within healthcare. So the third week of the month, you're doing a series just for healthcare IT executives, health tech. And we set the invitations to be like from 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 to 10 a.m. The first 30 minutes when they get there, they're having some breakfast and chatting and mingling with their peers and some of your team members. From 9 to 9:40, you have the most amazingly impactful educational event experience where you're teaching something that's incredibly relevant for the top 5 or 6 big goals that they're working on right now, that you know from your customer insight research, or one of those top 5 or 6 big challenges that again came up in that customer insight research. And especially if it's a small group, keep it really participatory, give people a chance to get their questions asked. And following that, for anyone who's interested, you take them on a tour, lather, rinse, repeat. Just consistently do that. The second week of the month is your secondary segment, your secondary buyer persona. The third week of the month is your third buyer persona. Now, for not 8:30 on Wednesday morning may not work for everybody. You have to do your homework. You have to figure out for your team members, whether you're better off with breakfast, lunch, evening after hours. If they're not locally by, it's best done with a webinar, with a virtual series. Always record. There's always bound to be people who attend who come up afterwards and say, my network manager, my IT director, they really wanted to be here, but they couldn't. Can I get the slides? Can I get the recording? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, for sure, do that. Make that available. We know, again, teams that learn together grow together. But the idea here is that when you insert yourself into their learning and development and their professional development process, magical things happen with a steady flow of the right leads and the right flow of sales opportunities and the right opportunities progressing from your deals board all the way through to closed won. And not only do you guarantee that you're on the short list, but in nearly all cases, you're staying on that short list. And when they're learning from you repeatedly, month after month, you know what's ending up happening? You are starving the time and attention and oxygen away from your direct and indirect competitors. And there's no reason for those prospects and clients to hang out with your direct and indirect competitors anymore, because they're getting such outrageously high levels of learning and development, professional development value from your team members. So this not only gets you on the short list and keeps you on the short list, it knocks competitive alternatives out of contention. So by the time they are in market, by the time they're ready for a sales conversation, the know, like, and trust is already off the charts with all of the key members of that decision-making committee, including the hidden members of your decision committee who aren't going to register and attend the events, but they've been getting the slides forwarded to them on the internal Slack channel the whole time. And they know all about how awesome, how amazing your team members are. Now, what if you don't have internal speakers to pull this off 12 times a year, but can only cover maybe 6 or 7 or 8 of those topics? No problem. Look to your contractors, look to your channel partners. You can bring in representative clients. You can bring in representative prospects and simply moderate a panel. Tons of the conference ecosystem depends on someone like yourself, maybe who's not as technical, being the one who just knows how to ask 10 or 12 really meaningful questions and invites the right 3 or 4 people and actually moderates that kind of conversation. For a lot of people on your team that are relatively new to data centers and digital infrastructure, the perfect role for them for the first couple of years may be being the tour guide, being the moderator, being the concierge, the one who pulls together all this program with the right subject matter experts. Now, if you're getting a lot of pushback internally where the subject matter experts aren't cooperating, that's a C-level problem. So getting your managing director, getting your divisional VP, getting your CEO, if it's a small to mid-sized company, to be your internal champion is incredibly, incredibly important. But all of this starts from saying, you know what, we're done with our prospects and clients treating us like crap. This isn't how it's going to be going forward. We have brilliant people. We have a great product or service. We have an amazing, relevant proposition. We're not going to pay the gatekeepers forever. We're not going to pay the toll takers forever. There's no reason to. We need to go direct so we don't lose fidelity in that message. It's incredibly important to creating awareness and educating and building trust, that we spend more time with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that our prospects and clients see our client-facing team members as some of the smartest, nicest, most professional people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything directly related to our category. So that's how I would approach having a steady flow of data center clients. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to drop that in the comments. Okay, what's up for our next question? How do we overcome new data center technology resistance? How do we overcome new data center technology resistance? When I hear that question, what that usually tells me is that you truly need a multidisciplinary approach to this on your side, because your clients approach it multidisciplinary as well, whether they're being transparent with you or not. So who needs to be on your team when you're talking about these issues? First and foremost, depending on your company size, you may have more granular roles or less granular roles. Typically, if you work for a enterprise company with thousands or tens of thousands or more employees, you'll have a much more granular way of segmenting up job titles and roles and responsibilities compared to someone that works for a much smaller company that has a few dozen or a few hundred employees. But other things being equal, this is something that's typically tackled in companies of all sizes at the intersection of product and at the intersection of sales, marketing, and customer success. And depending on whether you're a data center operator or in technology or in facilities or construction or real estate or investment, there might be slightly different ways of addressing it, but there's almost always someone at the executive level that's responsible for deciding what products and services your company actually provides. For a technology company, and there's 22 different kinds of data center technology companies that we track over at DCSMI, with an extraordinarily high level of certainty, there is a product manager or a VP of product management or a chief product officer or something like that on your team who owns roadmap and who owns all of the understanding what's going on in the marketplace from a competitive standpoint, and understanding among your existing clients and future clients what they want, and translating that into needs and translating that into commercial plans that goes down to engineers and developers to actually build. And in most technology companies now, over the last several years, there's even been a divvying up of responsibilities between the more tactical parts, the more strategic parts of product management, and thinking a little bit more long-term. So it's quite common now that we see innovation as the first cousin, but a separate kind of C-level responsibility in a lot of data center and technology related companies. So there's that part of it. Then increasingly, we see marketing executives and sales executives, and both pre-sales and post-sales, being pulled into these similar kinds of early conversations on how to best address this. Now, what's interesting as well, in a lot of small to mid-sized companies, in some cases, there's hyphenated or what we call combined roles. So in other words, you'll see a chief marketing officer / chief product officer, meaning that it's one person who's the C-level executive who's responsible for marketing and product. In some cases, it's sales and product. I just interviewed someone on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast a few weeks ago who is global VP of sales and product for an engineering and storage company. So in that particular organization, they decided that sales and product are joined as the hip. And a completely kind of similar, but a little bit different type of thing that I'm noticing in Europe is among co-location operators. There's an interest in combining sustainability with marketing and joining that as the hip. So you see chief marketing officer / chief sustainability officer, meaning one person at the C-level owns marketing and sustainability. But in this particular case, when we're talking about overcoming technology resistance, this is for sure something that needs to be addressed at the product management level to figure out why there's this resistance, how you're building your roadmap of the near future and intermediate level future, how you're deciding when you're actually going to deliver these features that help to overcome that. So there's for sure product leadership, there's marketing leadership that needs to be involved in educating and building trust. Marketing leadership will help support the sales team by creating sales enablement tools that help the sales development reps, business development reps, account executives to overcome this resistance in the pre-sales process. And marketing and product will typically work together with account managers, client success managers as well, to build educational resources, knowledge bases, explainer videos, webinar series, various tools that help in the post-purchase scenario, that help with onboarding, initial value, intended value, extended value, land and expand, upselling, cross-selling, customer marketing, all of those related disciplines for overcoming resistance in the post-purchase phase. The key thing with all of this is recognizing that your buyers are now a lot more in the driver's seat than you are. They have all the power. If your buyers don't exist, if your buyers don't vote for your company with their dollars, pounds, euros, whatever your currency is with their budget, your company ceases to exist. So how do we be incredibly client-centric? This is a cultural issue for a lot of companies. It's getting closer and closer to your end customers. And where this can be especially challenging is if you sell through distributors, if you sell through manufacturers' reps, if you sell through channel partners, because it's not so much that they want to keep you in the dark, but it just adds another layer to helping you versus hurting you, getting closer to that direct feedback from end customers. So we really, really have to know what the source of the resistance is. In most cases, this is a combination of a product marketing, a education and trust building type of issue, a customer marketing type of challenge. Because at the end of the day, if we really understand exactly who our ideal clients are, where they're located, how big or small they are, which has massive implications into how their IT organization is structured and resourced and what they do internally versus what they outsource, what industries they're in. Again, massive, massive implications with data center technology when it comes to various industries because of the intersection of regulated industries versus non-regulated industries and the kind of demands they make of data center technology providers. So for sure, geography, industry, company size all makes a massive difference in understanding whether it's one source of resistance or a couple of different segments, a couple of different kinds, a couple of different sub-personas of resistance. We really need to truly understand that to figure out how we're building this into our product and services strategy, how we're building this into our onboarding strategy, how we're building this into our lead generation strategy, our lead nurturing, our event strategy, all needs to take this into account. So at the end of the day, it is super, super important to get as close to our end clients as possible. And in the course of channel partners, of course, getting incredibly close to your channel partners as well, and having incredible amounts of insight and empathy for the 5 or 6 big goals that they're tasked with that show up in each individual's job description and in their objectives and key results, their OKRs. Sometimes it's even as transparent that you see some of this listed on their LinkedIn profile on what they're responsible for. Most of the time, what you really need is locked up in more trusted information that you won't get access to unless you're a trusted advisor. But it's still incredibly important to get the consensus on those 5 or 6 big goals that they're working on individually as a team, as a company, that are directly and indirectly relevant to your data center technology category. And the flip side of it is, in addition to the goals they're working on, what's driving them nuts? What's their biggest source of frustration? What's stressing them out to no end? What's messing with their work-life balance? What could even be causing mental health issues? It's all, we need to know these challenges in their own words, because the better job we do of understanding their own words, the more we can develop tools and educational events and resources that help to proactively address these various sources of technology resistance throughout the full journey. So we have to know what they're struggling with most on a buyer persona by buyer persona basis. Because let's say as a data center technology company, you decide that you're segmenting up between, say you have a lot of expertise in selling to healthcare companies, financial services companies, and then other. So let's maybe, for example, it's that simple, that's your segmentation strategy. So what that means is when it comes to your product strategy, when it comes to your product marketing, when it comes to your lead generation, when it comes to your premium content, when it comes to your in-person events, when it comes to your webinars, when it comes to all of that, your videos, your podcasts, we need to know exactly what those resistance points are for the healthcare executive, the healthcare IT executive, for the financial services IT executive, and then for everyone else. And the better job we do of understanding those resistance points in their own words, the more likely it is that what we're providing actually resonates as to falling completely flat. And once you have those insights, that feeds the product management team, that feeds the marketing organization, that feeds the sales organization, that feeds post-sales, and it feeds into the channel partner playbook as well. I'll just put this out there. A lot of people come to me and want to build a channel partner program prematurely. Wasn't prematurely? In order for you to have a successful channel partner organization with fractional channel partners that are working with your company for a small sliver of their month, for a small sliver of their week, they're really counting on you having a lot of the answers to most of the questions that you should be figuring out and continuing to figure out and maintain and iterate with your own internal team members. In other words, you have one or more marketing professionals, you have one or more teams of sales professionals. They figure out a lot of things over time when it comes to product market fit, when it comes to go-to-market fit, when it comes to messaging, when it comes to headlines, when it comes to call to action, when it comes to buyer's journey steps, resistance. That information is incredibly powerful and incredibly important to scaling a channel partner organization, where instead of your full-time professionals that are with you 40, 50, 60 hours a week, your channel partners are with you, if you're lucky, a couple of hours a month. So they don't want to be your guinea pigs. They don't want to be your lab rat experiments. They want you to take the playbooks that you've already figured out internally with your own marketers, with your own sales professionals, with your own product, with your own support, with your own account managers, and share those playbooks with them so they can have a lot more impact as they go to market as an extension of your team, as they market, as they sell, and as they service with their clients and deal with that kind of technology resistance. If you're counting on your channel partners to figure these things out for you, you're going to do brand damage really, really quickly and find it really difficult, increasingly difficult, to find any channel partners that are willing to give you the time of day. So yeah, that's how you figure out if that's your tertiary or your fourth most important buyer persona. But with all of this is largely to figure out the technology resistance. We need to know in their own words what the resistance actually is, what the struggles are, what their goals are, buyer persona by buyer persona. And if we want to proactively overcome that, their exact words, those insights need to get fed into everything that we do. The page on the website that's specific to that persona, the lead generation offer, the event strategy, the social media posts, the email newsletter, the digital ads, everything, the events, everything starts with getting as close as possible to those core 2, 3, 4 segments and understanding exactly what's going on in their own words, and specifically why they're resistant to technology in your category. And then and only then are you in a position to begin to meet them where they are. Not where you'd like them to be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but where they actually are now, and begin to educate and build trust. And that's the name of the game with everything today. This is especially when you're selling to incredibly technical, very skeptical, very cynical, highly educated IT decision makers who were never big fans of sales and marketing going back decades. They now distrust sales and marketing even more than they ever have. And they're like, cool, I don't need to talk to sales and marketing folks anymore. I can talk to ChatGPT instead. If you want to be able to earn your way in an environment where ChatGPT and Copilot and Bing and Perplexity and Claude and Gemini are now the default points of interaction for so many of your buyer personas, we need to go next level. They need to see us as peers. They need to see us more like teachers and consultants and trusted advisors, and not just a vendor who's pushing them to take a meeting with them and pushing them to get a deal on the deal board and pushing them aggressively to get them to introduce you to their peers and their boss and reveal information that frankly you haven't earned the ability to be able to get those kinds of prospects and clients to feel comfortable sharing that kind of trusted information with you. But when you lead with education, when you get out of the vendor box, when you're no longer seen by the traditional job titles on your business card and your email signature on your LinkedIn profile, and instead are seen more like the expert, game changer for everything when it comes to overcoming technology resistance. Now, not everyone on your team is going to be a former peer of someone that's a core buyer persona. Not everyone's going to be a true expert. There's a place for entry-level folks on your team as well. They can be great tour guides, concierges, great moderators, great coordinators that pull together all of the resources to make this happen. But the better job that you can do individually as a team and as a company with taking a dramatically saturation kind of approach to spending as many of those 28 touch points with them as possible throughout their early and middle stages of their journey, the more likely it is that you're proactively and much more effectively overcoming new data center technology resistance, not just at the individual level, but at the team level across the full decision committee. So that's what I'd be thinking about for a company that needs to overcome new data center technology resistance. If you're enjoying what we're talking about so far, make sure to hit the like button. So what's up next? What's our next topic? Sales cycles, procurement cycles, and timelines. That's a big one. So how do you improve data center sales cycle and procurement timelines? How do you improve data center sales cycle and procurement timelines? We hear this quite often. And where the symptoms of this usually is you've generated a lead. That lead has progressed to a sales opportunity. It's sitting in your pipeline. It's sitting on your deals board. And it's gotten to like 10, 20%, 30% likelihood of close, and it's going nowhere fast. Why is it going nowhere fast? It could be a host of different reasons. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are continuing to try to sell the same way they did 10 years ago. And it's no longer effective because your prospects and clients have changed. The marketplace has changed quite dramatically. Most of your competition has adjusted. And if you haven't, it's really, really difficult to earn your way in early enough and often enough to truly be effective in a pre-sales context, like as in a business development, sales development rep, or account executive, or something similar to that. So if we want to improve the sales cycle timelines and improve the procurement cycle timelines, I would first put out there that if a procurement officer is one of your prioritized buyer personas, 90% of the cases, you're going nowhere fast. Unless you have a massive company and you're supremely good at selling huge government, huge enterprise deals where you're specifically working with procurement officers. The reality is it's not so much that you're trying to go around them, but if you have an overwhelming amount of support with the actual users and the actual economic decision makers and the full decision committee, typically there's more than enough weight where in most cases, the procurement officer is largely an order taker and a gopher and an administrator that works for the influential people that are on that decision-making committee. In other words, the procurement person rarely is actually a true decision maker for your category. Sure, there are things that procurement departments buy where the procurement officer actually is the decision maker for most things that are data center related. They're usually not experts on data center technology or data center facilities or data center operations or data center construction or data center real estate or anything like that. So in much the same way that in some companies, HR is at an executive level and HR can also operate at like an order taker level. In most cases, procurement usually is operating at more of an order taker level. And if that's the only way you're getting a foot in the door, there's bigger symptomatic problems of your go-to-market strategy because procurement is not going to be the ultimate end customer, the ultimate end user of whatever it is that you're providing within the data center ecosystem. So let's just put a thumbtack in procurement for now. And best case scenario, let's say that they're a tertiary or fourth or fifth or sixth priority buyer persona where we may have a little bit of tools and education for them, but it's certainly not the first place or two that we're going to start. Where I'd encourage you to start is to better understand the journey that your most important buyer personas go through when they're researching and making decisions in your particular category. And what that comes down to is really doing a good job on your customer insight research and on your homework to understand the last time that they worked on an initiative like this, worked on a project like this. What were the steps that they went through? Who was involved? What caused them to want to prioritize that initiative? What was the criteria that they ultimately used? And how long ago did they actually go through this process? The how long ago is a big one too, because it's kind of like if you know people that have worked in IT for a couple of decades, they're probably at this stage, Gen X or baby boomers, they can reminisce about what it was like to work just before the commercial internet really became a significant part of their career, meaning that they started their career probably sometime in the 1980s or 1990s, and the commercial internet started to become a huge part of IT careers in the mid to late 1990s. We're kind of going through that exact same moment now with generative AI, where was it like late 2022, where OpenAI released the first beta version of ChatGPT and literally took on like tens of millions of users in the first few days. Like the growth was crazy compared to anything that anyone had previously seen, even by standards of judging it against like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and other kinds of wildly successful consumer adopted technologies. So we kind of think about like how the world existed before the LLM apps, before generative AI, before ChatGPT and those handful of other apps, and then after. And in a world where if you thought having access to a Google search, a voice activated Google search on a mobile device in the 2010s was like, wow, like you've reached the promised land with all this, for the kind of highly technical, highly skeptical, highly educated IT decision maker, having access to an app on their phone that doesn't require that they click on one by one 10 blue links and figure out what's really going on, but does that for them instantly, is insane. And we know each iteration, each model, whether it's ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, it just keeps getting crazy better, to the point where people half jokingly, half seriously talk about having like friends and family members and coworkers that are in a relationship with ChatGPT or Copilot. And they're saying it half jokingly, half seriously, where they actually ask it for relationship advice, and they have the same kind of conversations that they would have with a coworker, a boss, a significant other, like a spouse, a girlfriend, a fiance, something like that. And you start to hear the prognosticators predicting that we're a generation away from people actually marrying AI robots because of how lifelike these interactions become. You start to realize that, oh my gosh, we are in competition to a certain degree with earning our way in as sales professionals, as marketing professionals in this data center ecosystem, with the very technologies that are filling up our data centers and driving all this crazy amounts of growth. So with all of that in mind, how do we improve our data center sales cycle timelines? How do we get better information, better insights as to how our ideal clients, how our ideal prospects research and make their purchase decisions? These are challenges that sales professionals and marketing professionals have been dealing with for decades. The urgency to all of this now is that it's not just LinkedIn, it's not just YouTube, it's not just review websites, it's not just Google. It's the immersive instant gratification of getting the answers and the summary and the punchline and the analysis like instantly. So what we increasingly see is that to improve the sales cycle, improve the timelines, we're seeing more companies throughout the data center ecosystem hiring talent that's a lot more specialized than it ever was in the past. In other words, this changes the nature of who you hire, how you do recruiting, how you do promotion, how you do cross-selling, how you do workforce development, how you do upskilling. And what we're increasingly seeing is among data center operators and technology companies, they're hiring career IT professionals into client-facing roles, into business development roles, account executive, account management roles, so that when they're interacting with prospects and clients, it feels like that prospecting client is talking with a peer of theirs. Now, that peer, that person on the commercial side in your business that's interacting with those prospects and clients, doesn't need to have gotten to the exact same seniority level as the person they're interacting with, but it feels like they would at least be in the same department, at least the same kind of organization, and the same kind of company. So they have a lot of instincts, empathy, really, really understanding how that industry, how those teams actually go about making IT decisions, and they've walked a kilometer, walked a mile, or lots of kilometers or lots of miles in that prospect's or client's shoes. So we're seeing that among the operators and the technology companies, among the facilities related companies and construction related companies. We're seeing a lot more engineers hired into the roles where they're selling to like a facilities manager or a director of engineering or a data center manager or something like that equivalent, where it's a lot more facilities heavy. So engineering hires in their roles. And again, for the exact same reason, is that it makes prospects and clients feel comfortable that the person that they're talking with isn't just showing up and reading the website or reading the slides to them, but actually truly understands what it's like to do their job. So we're seeing that with incredible amounts of velocity as a big trend in the industry. We're also seeing among companies that have the resources to do this a lot more specialization of roles. So it's not just enough to hire the career IT professional or the career engineer into these commercial related roles. They're hiring people that understand specific industries. So let's say, for example, that your company has deep expertise selling to health tech, selling into healthcare. Well, you might hire an IT director who worked in a hospital for a couple of years. Let's say, for example, you're selling a lot of digital infrastructure to energy companies, to oil and gas companies. Well, someone that worked in some kind of engineering role in the oil and gas ecosystem would be incredibly impactful in a kind of role because of the know, like, and trust in their instincts and learning their way around the department. So historically, sales and marketing organizations, especially sales organizations, segmented by life cycle stages, meaning that there were certain people that hung around with really early stage prospects, mid-funnel, mid-journey prospects, late-stage prospects, and then post-clients. So that's where you saw like sales development, business development, account executives, account managers. So we're segmenting up by life cycle stage. It's super common as well, going back generations, to segment geographically, like by territory, addressable markets, target account lists. That's a very well-worn playbook. However, one of the best ways to improve data center sales cycle timelines is pairing up the prospecting client with a commercial team member that's a lot like they are. Similar educational background, similar stops on their CV, on their resume, on their LinkedIn profile. They may even be calling on people who are former coworkers or worked in other adjacent companies in that same ecosystem. And then the advanced version of that is we're segmenting even further, where we're saying among the team, we're going to have specialists who just work with manufacturing companies, or just work with telecommunications companies, or just work with state, local education, or just work with higher ed. The sky's the limit on how granular you want to make that. And a lot of it depends on the strengths and weaknesses of your product and services portfolio, of your roadmap, of where you want to make these investments. But that's a lot of what we see that's dramatically improving your ability to improve your visibility into and impact data center sales cycle timelines. Another big trend that we see that's dramatically impacting, it's dramatically allowing you to impact data center sales cycle timelines and sales cycle acceleration, is recognizing that if you keep doing the same thing you've been doing forever, you're largely invisible through most of the sales cycle, through most of the journey. Meaning that self-driven journeys are so predominant now, where like 83% of the researching, comparing option decision-making now happens without you in the room, that if you don't reinvent your team, if you don't reinvent yourself for how people in decision-making roles and decision committee roles navigate their choices in a post-open AI kind of world, in a post-generative AI kind of world, you're largely invisible in the formative stages where you could shape the criteria that they use in your category. And the only way to earn your way in early and often isn't by buying a bigger booth or a more expensive sponsorship, or essentially trying to bribe your prospects and clients. Most of your prospects and clients that are not big fans of sales and marketing through most of those bribes anyway. You're getting nowhere fast. But what they do still need is they do still need to keep their skills sharp. They need to learn how others in similar job functions and similar companies are reaching their professional goals, helping achieve their teams and their company's biggest goals when it comes to their kind of job function. And just as importantly, how they're overcoming some of their biggest struggles and challenges. And the better job you do with that, with repositioning your team to be seen more as an extension of their learning and development and professional development time, the more you'll earn your way in early and often, and can have a very, very impactful role in that first 83% of the journey in a significant portion of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And in order to do that right, get super specific at the company level, at that ideal client profile, get super specific about who those prioritized buyer personas are, their big goals and challenges, and make your whole education, your customer education program, your partner education program, your prospect education program to be 100% focused on each segment's biggest goals and biggest challenges in their own words. At the risk of oversimplifying it, if your buyer persona research, if your client insight research turns up 5 or 6 big goals, 5 or 6 big challenges for a segment for one of your buyer personas, take those 10 or 12 topics, and once a month for the next 10 or 12 months, that's your educational events calendar for your breakfast seminar series, your lunch and learn series, your webinar series, and make sure that the event titles use their exact words, not what you think the words are, but what the words actually are, if you want to resonate with the people that you're trying to attract, so you can educate and build trust with those folks. And when you do that repeatedly, and you start to meet other people within that company that are peers and potentially even the boss, the supervisor, the ultimate one who's going to sign off on that, various stakeholders who are part of that decision committee, that makes an enormous, enormous difference into getting visibility into how they're going to research and make their purchase decisions, and what's involved for you to dramatically accelerate the sales cycle. But what a lot of people don't realize is that there's only so much that you can do with playing games with false scarcity and imaginary discounts and discounts that keep reappearing over and over and over again, and threats and leverage and everything. At the end of the day, to truly be a trusted advisor, to truly be a trusted resource in the data center ecosystem, we can't sell like that. We can't look like used car salespeople. In order for us to look like trusted advisors and teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and thought leaders, we need to understand what's going on individually, at the team level, at the company level, and how our product or service helps support that initiative, both with this person and other people that are on that person's team, on that decision committee. And the better job we do of understanding the granularity, the segmentation, how the goals are different for different kinds of stakeholders, and the better job we do with supporting that in an education and trust building kind of context, the more success we're going to have of being able to improve our data center sales cycle timelines. And like I said at the beginning of this, if procurement is your primary or secondary buyer persona, you're probably doing this very, very wrong. Procurement, in most cases, if you do this right, is not a gatekeeper. They're an order taker, because unless you're selling procurement software, they're probably not the subject matter experts on your category. So be respectful, possibly consider them a 4th or 5th or 6th priority kind of persona or segment. But if procurement is how you're getting your foot in the door with a particular company, I don't know what to tell you, except you probably should look for other stakeholders in the company that are closer to the economic value and economic impact of your product or service, if you truly understand what business you're in. This goes back to like the innovator's dilemma and the late Clayton Christensen, and the job to be done. So things that product managers spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out, and innovation officers spend a ridiculous amount of time on trying to get right in the never-ending quest to provide outrageous amounts of value to their prospects, clients, and channel partners. Is when you understand truly the job that you do, it becomes a lot easier to know who benefits from that most. And in most cases, it's probably not centralized procurement. It more than likely, if you're somewhere in the data center industry, are technologists, engineers, construction, developers, finance people. They all can have a pretty big impact depending on your category. But what's most important is they all need to see you and your client-facing team members as experts, not just another vendor, but truly the be-all, end-all experts with world-class expertise on anything and everything that's directly related to your category. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how to improve data center sales cycle and procurement timelines. If you're enjoying what we're talking about so far, be sure to hit the like button wherever you're watching. We're going to take a real quick break from a message from our sponsor, and then we're going to dive back in and tackle 3 more data center go-to-market sales and marketing challenges. Welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg. In this podcast, we explore the data center landscape with expert
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest go-to-market sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from the global data center ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So what's up next? We're going to now turn our attention to a category of data center operator, and in particular, companies that sell to hyperscalers, which could be other hyperscalers selling to hyperscalers. It could be colocation operators selling to hyperscalers. It could be data center tech. It could be data center facilities. There's a lot of different parts of the data center ecosystem that want to sell to hyperscalers. Why does everyone want to sell to hyperscalers? Because the unit economics are outrageously high. So how do we target hyperscalers or large clients and finding deals among these hyperscalers and large clients? So the challenge with hyperscalers is there's a lot fewer hyperscaler buyers than there are colocation buyers. For a colocation operator, regardless of whether you're a local or regional or national or global colocation provider, if you're selling colocation, even on a local level, there's probably a couple hundred potential local clients. It could be a couple thousand depending on where you're located. And if you aggregate that up regionally, if you aggregate that up nationally or globally, it's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of potential co-location buyers that are a candidate to take a rack, a cabinet, a suite, or something like that in one or more of your facilities. And again, the only time when it's usually limited to just a couple hundred companies is if you have a single facility and a single local market. Selling to hyperscalers are different. The reality is there's only a couple dozen hyperscalers that are relevant to most geographic markets where you're selling to. And again, you could be a co-location operator that has some space that you want to sell on a wholesale basis, like a whole building at a time, a whole facility at a time, a whole campus at a time, to a hyperscaler. You could be a data center developer or wholesale data center provider that powered shell to a hyperscaler. A lot of times you're talking about selling some aspect of technology to a hyperscaler, like you have a storage platform or cybersecurity platform or some kind of DSIM, some kind of management platform, automation platform that you'd love to see a hyperscaler standardize on. Or maybe you're on the facilities related side. Maybe you have something related to cooling or power. And again, you think this would be the perfect fit for a hyperscaler, at least regionally or nationally, perhaps globally. And you're trying to figure out how you get a foot in the door. How do you find these potential deals? So the good news is when it comes to, like I said, the bad news is there's not that many potential buyers. In most marketplaces, it may be just a few dozen companies. The good news is the unit economics can be insanely large. Even a relatively small deal with a hyperscaler in most categories is usually at least a 5 or 6 figure deal. In some cases, it could be a 7 or 8 figure deal or more, or your local currency equivalent. So they're outrageously large deals, but you're typically selling to really large companies. And really large companies tend to be really conservative. They tend to be really risk averse, and trust is incredibly important to them. I would put out there as well that mid-market and enterprise companies, especially enterprise companies, which most hyperscalers are, tend to feel most comfortable buying from other companies that are large companies. They feel safe buying from large companies. If you've been in the industry for decades, you probably remember a time when the expression was used, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. I don't hear people say that quite as often anymore. Maybe in our industry, nobody ever got fired for buying, I don't know, who would be the equivalent of that in our industry? Nobody ever got fired for choosing Digital Realty or Equinix or some other huge global data center operator. The reality, again, huge companies tend to feel safer buying from mid-size and large-size companies, and they feel a lot more nervous buying from smaller companies. That's usually why, for small independently owned co-location operators, they could potentially sell to hyperscalers, but a lot of times they're going to lose out in their local marketplace to more mid-market players that, instead of having 1 or 2 facilities and a couple handfuls or a couple dozen clients, the larger companies feel more comfortable buying from a mid-sized data center operator with a few hundred clients with literally billions in capital at their disposal and a couple dozen different facilities. Like in the US, who would I consider like mid-sized national companies? Maybe like QTS, Flexential, a DataBank, maybe TierPoint are in that category. We're a couple hundred employees, probably at least a dozen or 2 dozen facilities, plenty of capital, and largely when it comes to hyperscalers, they're generally going to feel safer than buying from a co-location facility that's a single facility that they own, and they rent space in a couple of other facilities in a couple other parts of the US or a couple other parts of the world. That's kind of so when people come to me and they tell me they want to get a foot in the door with hyperscalers, like the question is, what do they have that's so unique that's going to cause an executive, a decision committee member at a huge company that's really risk averse to potentially bet their career on choosing a relatively unknown company in the marketplace? And the way you're typically going to know if you're on the right track is usually there's pretty objective ways that they qualify or disqualify people. There's financial requirements, there's insurance requirements, there's integration requirements, there's sales cycle length. There's a lot of issues and complications and challenges that can come up that preclude really small companies from being able to sell to hyperscalers. If you're talking about just at the operator level, if you're talking about technology and facilities companies, again, it happens to a certain degree. Like, let's say, for example, that you have a battery backup company that's challenging the incumbents in the space, and you have 100 employees, and you're in 2 or 3 locations, and you're closing in on, I don't know, 50 million in revenue or 100 million in revenue or your local currency equivalent. If you have something that's exceptionally unusual, that's especially built for hyperscalers that none of the big guys in the space have, you might have a shot. But more than likely, they're going to feel most comfortable buying from one of the 4 or 5 huge global conglomerate companies in that category that are publicly traded and then operate literally all over the world and have deep resources. So again, like, there's the dream logo client, which may not. The problem too is if any CEO that's been around a while knows about like revenue concentration risks, and if all of a sudden 50%, even 20% of your revenue is coming from a single client and you're doing all of this custom work, like, where does that leave the rest of your business if something goes away with that particular client? The risks around that. So these are the things that keep people up nights with figuring out like what the best way is to scale and get to that level. And usually what it ends up happening is smaller companies smaller technology providers, smaller facilities providers, smaller data center operators tend to do really well selling to small business and selling to mid-market, like one or two levels beyond where they currently are, but they struggle to get a foot in the door and to gain a lot of traction with the biggest of the big logo companies, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 kind of companies that are, in many cases, these hyperscalers are. The reality is they can be a rock star, though, with the local $100 million, $500 million small and mid-sized companies in their local area that aren't getting what they need from the big guys. They don't have that level of relationship. They certainly don't have the mobile number of the CEO or CTO to call when they actually have suggestions. They've never even met that person because they're just a number. So there's a lot of pros and cons with pairing up your size versus their size. But if you're targeting hyperscalers or large clients and finding deals, what I'd lean very heavily into is account-based marketing, ABM. Sometimes I've seen in the industry called, more recently, I saw someone post a job description last week, and they were looking for someone to lead up. I don't remember whether it was Schneider or Vertiv or someone else in that category. It's called ABX, account-based experience. So it's basically, they're thinking account-based marketing, account-based sales, account-based account management, account-based everything. So account-based experience. So from purely from a strategic, from a tactical standpoint, with account-based marketing, I'd be using a combination of outbound outreach using highly personalized, incredibly customized outbound emails and outbound LinkedIn messages, and perhaps a little bit of outbound video. Probably not so much on the calls, but I think video, personalized LinkedIn messages, personalized emails would be pretty effective in that category, as long as you're really focused on what their needs are throughout the full journey, not just trying to get them into a sales process. And I would for sure spend a significant amount of time building a full journey, lead generation, lead nurturing, educational events strategy, and promote that and re-promote that over and over and over again using the LinkedIn ads platform, LinkedIn Campaign Manager. The reason why LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn Campaign Manager is a beautiful, effective way to do this for even smaller companies. And there are a lot of mid-market and enterprise tools that help you take that to the next level. But because LinkedIn Campaign Manager is self-service, even relatively small companies that are new to this can roll up their sleeves and get involved. And yes, there is a learning curve. It's not quite as straightforward as Facebook ads or Google ads, but it is incredibly powerful. So if you have 20, 30, 40 hyperscaler accounts that you want to generate leads from, that you want to educate and build trust with, literally you're providing that list of accounts to LinkedIn. And you're saying, for example, I want every person that has an information technology job function that has a high level of seniority in this particular company, which in terms of the seniority levels that LinkedIn uses on Campaign Manager and Sales Navigator might be like CXO, owner, partner, director, and vice president. So I want everyone in those 5 job titles, those 5 levels of seniority that works in the information technology job function, to see our ads on LinkedIn. It could be the traditional text ads, not as big as they used to be. It could be sponsored posts like static images. It could be the LinkedIn document ads. It could be LinkedIn video ads. It could be conversational ads. It could be all of the above. But at the end of the day, you're saying, okay, there's a list of companies. I want to skim the top of people that are in a senior level role, starting with at least a director level role, an information technology job function. And the mistake that a lot of people make is they go in for the kill way too soon. They try to get people to book a sales call on his very first interaction. Huge, huge, huge mistake. It's like going on a first date with someone and saying, oh, maybe we should get married tonight. You're like, what? Maybe we should take our relationship to the next level. We just met like 10 minutes ago. What the heck are you talking about? So don't do that with your strategy. Especially among highly technical, highly cynical, very skeptical anti-sales and marketing folks, it's so important to educate and build trust. We have to know exactly who they are, what they care about. And I would go so far with hyperscalers where you're potentially targeting a couple hundred senior or a couple thousand senior level executives in these companies. I would customize the ad copy. I would customize the landing page. I would customize the offer for that specific company. How do you know what to talk about in that specific company? Well, you've done your buyer persona research, right? You figured out what's top of mind, what's going on in their world, what their biggest goals are at the intersection of your category, what they're struggling most with at the intersection of your category. Yeah, that's your ideas for your headlines. That's the ideas for your copywriting. That's the ideas for your bullet points. But we need to educate and build trust with them over time. Yes, there could be 3% or 5% of the people that could be ready for an immediate conversation. For me, for what I like to do with those kind of campaigns is someone downloads an ebook, registers for a webinar, registers for an event on the confirmation page. On the confirmation email, I always give people a chance to raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I'm ready to talk to someone that's an account manager or a business development person. At this point, 19 out of 20, 97, 98 out of 100 are nowhere near ready for that. And that's the only thing you're pushing. You're going to turn them off. If you come on too strong, you'll for sure turn them off. But yeah, you're looking to figure out a way to stay with them throughout that journey, as many of those 25, 30 touch points that they go through as possible throughout the full journey. So it's the same approach that I recommend for most of the data center ecosystem. Educational events, could be webinars, could be in person, could ideally be a mix of the two. And they want to learn from peers. That's part of the reason why some people in these roles have gotten really smitten over the last few years of hiring famous people that work for famous analyst firms for being the speakers. I don't think you necessarily need to do that. If you have some great internal experts who are career IT professionals that can talk about best practices for achieving the goals that you know that they have, that have surfaced in the customer insight research, and overcoming some of the biggest challenges and stressors and blockers that they're currently facing in overcoming some of their biggest goals around digital infrastructure and hyperscale. Use your internal subject matter experts, the same kind of people that likely already speak at conferences in this same kind of context. Once you've exhausted those folks, you could go to your channel partners, you could go to your contractors, you could moderate conversations with clients and channel partners. The key thing with all of this is to educate and build trust and get in there early and get in there often. A very small percentage could be ready for a sales conversation on that first interaction or two, but what's way more likely is they need months and months, or at least weeks and weeks of multiple touch points before they're like, okay, yeah, we love what you're saying. What you're saying is truly unique. We see you as an expert. We see you as a trusted advisor. We see you as a thought leader. Trust has been built up enough that we're finally ready to book some time on your calendar to talk about how you might be able to work with us. The bigger the company, the more skeptical, the more cynical they are, the weaker your brand is, the more that's incredibly important. The PR giant Edelman does some great research every year working with LinkedIn on B2B thought leadership, and they continue to find year after year that thought leadership is incredibly impactful to winning over hidden stakeholders, to getting companies to go to bat for you during RFP, request for proposal kind of processes. And if your thought leadership does enough with stirring the pot and getting them to think about whether they really are on the right track with what their approach is, or whether they should be considering alternative approaches, that can make your thought leadership even tremendously impactful, even if your brand isn't that strong. In other words, it can overcome excellent thought leadership, can even overcome a less powerful brand from a smaller company. So yeah, being seen as a trusted advisor, being seen as an expert, being seen as a thought leader is a huge, huge part of making this work. Now, I will tell you as well that when you're talking about a data center developer, when you're talking about a wholesale data center provider, everything that I just talked about, they love, but they really only want to pay for it on a commission-only basis. In other words, in a perfect world, a wholesale data center developer, a real estate investor would love if everyone worked on a commission-only basis. So they'd love to go to LinkedIn, they'd love to go to marketing agencies, they'd love to hire marketing managers, sales enablement managers, webinar producers, everyone, and only pay them when it actually closes, and which is wildly unrealistic for a company that needs a significant amount of work to build up and continue to build up and keep their brand in front of the intended audience. So you see two different kinds of approaches. You see companies that want to build their own direct playbook for lead generation, sales cycle acceleration, sales enablement with their own team members. And then you see other companies that are way more comfortable taking that space where they're looking for an anchor tenant and where they're looking for large marquee tenants to fill up that space. And they give that entire project to a real estate advisory firm, to a real estate firm that gets primarily paid or entirely paid on a commission only basis. So that does tend to come up a little bit more often when we talk about companies that are trying to land hyperscalers. Most companies in this ecosystem still strongly believe in branding and differentiation and positioning to be able to give them the leverage that they need, especially with negotiating with companies that are significantly larger than they are. But there are companies that are willing to play okay, we're just a commodity, or just have land and power access. Let's let the real estate experts fight over all of this. There's pros and cons to both approaches. A lot of companies like to have their cake and eat it and have both going on at the same time. But if you're looking to target hyperscalers or large deals and finding deals, I think it's super important to really dial in that ideal client profile. The couple dozen companies that either have or are looking to have facilities in your area. Know who you want to target. We talked about targeting the intersection of job function and seniority level. You can set up a separate campaign targeting specific job titles, although you definitely won't pick up everyone because LinkedIn uses a lot of inferential machine learning to figure those out and definitely doesn't get it right 100% of the time. So in addition to targeting the intersection of job function and seniority, you could target job title. Another way that you could potentially target within these companies is by skills endorsement. Like, for example, there's a data center skill. There is a cybersecurity skill. There's an engineering skill. There's a sustainability skill. There's hundreds of these different skills endorsements. I actually think it's even more than hundreds. I'm aware of hundreds. There's probably thousands or tens of thousands of these skills endorsements. And these tend to show up when you look at an individual's LinkedIn profile and you see that so-and-so has been endorsed 99+ percent times, over 99 times for data centers. And they've been endorsed 40 times for sustainability. And they've been endorsed 11 times for cybersecurity, whatever it is. So when you look at your core buyer personas and you figure out like what the consensus is for what they're most endorsed for, you could also run ad campaigns that target individuals in specific companies that are endorsed for specific skills. It's another way of potentially reaching those folks. Now, most of the targeting parameters that you can use across LinkedIn Sales Navigator and LinkedIn Campaign Manager across the ads platform are the same. Skills endorsements, I think you can still only target on the ads platform. I don't think you can target them on Sales Navigator. But one thing you can target in both places, on both Sales Navigator and Campaign Manager, is group memberships. And there's dozens of very popular data center related LinkedIn groups. Now, I don't advocate that you join these groups and go in and spam them. That's actually going to cause brand damage more than it's actually going to help your case. But you can use group membership as a way to target people both with LinkedIn Sales Navigator with an outbound campaign and with ads. So let's say you're running LinkedIn sponsored posts or LinkedIn documents or LinkedIn native video, and you want to target everyone that belongs to the data center professionals group that's in a particular geographic region, that's at a certain company size, at a certain seniority level. So that's another potential way that you could target people that are in a hyperscaler decision-making kind of role. In other words, getting to these larger clients and finding deals. But in order to find the deals, it's very, very, very unlikely that on the first interaction that someone's going to immediately book time on your calendar and sign up and say, I'm going to put a deal on your deals board because I was up at 2:00 in the morning and I'm worried that I don't have enough salespeople to talk to. It just doesn't work like that. What's way more likely is earning our way in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that they see you and your client-facing team members as experts on your category that help their career as opposed to puts risk into their career and their team's career and their company's goals that they're working towards. And the way that's usually done is by educating and building trust. And events, in-person events, digital events are incredibly, incredibly impactful for doing this. Now, when I say events, I always have to qualify this by having a 10 by 10 piece of carpeting at someone else's events where 87% of the people coming by your booth are not even remotely qualified to your ideal client profile. 97% of them are not from hyperscalers. And even if the 3% did manage to come by, they're coming by from anywhere from 10 to 40 seconds, and you're not getting education and trust building going on. That's not the event I'm talking about. The event that I'm talking about is events that you host in your own facility, or if you're in the process of construction in someone else's facility, like a co-working space, a hotel, conference center, whatever it is. The goal at the end of the day is to take people that are on your target account list and say, again, those couple dozen hyperscalers and a couple thousand people that work for those hyperscalers, and invite them to a breakfast seminar, a lunch and learn, a webinar series on a topic or series of topics month after month that's highly relevant to what they're working on for achieving their individual, team, and company's goals. And when they do that and they see that there's experts that they can actually learn from that help them understand how others in similar companies are addressing these very issues, they'll register and attend. And when they trust that they're getting good value, they'll tend to bring their coworkers along with them, and you'll start to meet other members of the decision committee. And when that happens repeatedly month after month, they'll trust you enough that they'll start to tell you what's really going on, as opposed to what you think as an outsider is really going on. And that's where you really, really start to make a dent in figuring out the deals and getting the inside track. And when it comes to hyperscale, I know a lot of people love to invest in golf tournaments and love to invest in cabana parties. And I don't know, maybe if somebody has enough drinks in them, they'll loosen up about what's really going on. But you're not educating and building trust. They're not seeing you and your client-facing team members as the experts. And if you really, really want to turn the corner and get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box, it's so incredibly important in today's self-driven journey to be seen as the be-all end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with your category that directly impacts or indirectly impacts how a hyperscaler would choose to engage with a company like yours, regardless of what you do in technology or facilities or construction or real estate or raising capital. There's a lot of different categories that want time, that want attention, that want buy-in, that want trust from hyperscalers. So adjust accordingly for your category and your value proposition. But at the end of the day, if you don't want to be seen as a easily replaceable commodity broker, if you want to be truly differentiating throughout the full journey and being seen as an expert is incredibly, incredibly important. So that's how I would approach targeting hyperscalers or large enterprise clients and finding deals among those hyperscalers and large enterprise clients. Okay, next question. If you're enjoying what we've talked about so far at today's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word on whatever platform that you're watching. And feel free to review, rate us, leave comments on whatever you found most impactful and what you'd want to hear about next. Okay, next question we're going to talk about is how to set up data center meetings with potential clients. How to set up meetings with potential clients. This is an interesting one because as recently as 10 years ago, a big part of the key performance indicators and the goals that sales development reps, SDRs and BDRs, business development reps would be booking qualified meetings for their account executives, for their sales team. The reality is we now live in a world where so much of the data center ecosystem not only is incredibly resistant to booking meetings that they didn't first initiate themselves for their own reasons, but even if you do book the meetings, is their purpose for the meeting the same as your purpose for the meeting? I see increasingly, especially in the context of attending conferences, where people that have convinced their employer to invest tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or potentially millions annually on attending these conferences are so motivated to book meetings with quotes around meetings that they're trying to get meetings with me. Like, I'm not a buyer for turbine liquid natural gas generators. I'm for sure not a buyer of liquid cooling. I don't buy perimeter fencing. I don't buy fuel storage maintenance. I'm not a buyer for hyperscaler. Why are you trying to get a meeting with me? To just show some activity level to your boss that you're meeting with anyone? This is the whole like salespeople selling to salespeople, vendors selling to salespeople, vendors selling to vendors. And this is a lot of what's broken with the current status quo system is I want you, when you're making your decisions on where you're going to be in that fiduciary responsibility of being super responsible with how you spend your employer's money, I want you to, on the left-hand side of the screen for any conference that you're continuing having any role at, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about attending, because that in most cases is not free. You're buying a ticket and you're paying for flights, you're paying for hotel, and you're paying for food and potentially wining and dining peers that is certainly not free. In a lot of cases, multiple team members from your company are attending. If you decide to go next level with exhibiting or sponsoring, that starts to get significantly more, exponentially more expensive, exponentially more risk. And even if you're speaking, there's an opportunity cost, because very, very, very few people that are speaking at data center conferences are actually getting paid to speak, unless you're one of the celebrity speakers. In most cases, your executive, your subject matter expert is speaking because they perceive that that visibility is more than worth their time and more than worth their expense to travel to the conference. The quid pro quo in most cases at conferences is usually the speakers are getting their ticket comped. So you're limited to paying for your flight and your hotel and your meals, but there's still a time factor. And I would argue that one of the best deals still in the data center conference ecosystem is the 3% of the people at conferences who are speaking organically. What does speaking organically mean? It means that they actually earned the speaking slot as opposed to having to buy the speaking slot. That's becoming more and more rare as well. There's a lot of conferences where a lot of the speaking that's happening is because of direct or indirect compensation. And unlike a business to consumer context here, they don't really need to be totally transparent about who's earned and who's bought their way in. And even if they haven't directly bought their way in, they've bought their way in because they're a client of a media partner or an agency that has a relationship with that conference, or if nothing else, they're seen as a high value prospect for selling a huge booth or sponsorship opportunity to next year. In other words, there's a big monetization target on that free speaking opportunity that they offer to an individual from their company, because they want to get the inside track on monetizing that company in a huge way at next year's event. But if you think about a typical data center conference, 2,500 people attend, 75 speakers, so roughly 3% get to educate and build trust. In addition to those 3%, usually the speakers bring along an average of 2 coworkers. So there's another 150 people that come along that are coworkers of the 75 speakers. So roughly 225, roughly 10% of the 2,500 attendees get to either educate and build trust, or they're getting to coast on the goodwill that's built up by their boss or their coworkers that's educating and building trust. Another 10% of the people that are at the event, sometimes as many as another 20% of the people at the event, another 250 to 500 people at the event are there because they're working the expo floor. They're working the exhibitor floor. So roughly 80% of the people are either there because they're speaking, their coworkers are speaking, or they're there to exhibit. The other 80% of the people that are attending, the audience, the captive audience, you're the whole reason the conference exists. If there wasn't an audience, if you weren't in that 80% of attendees, there'd be no reason for people to exhibit or sponsor. There'd be no reason to speak. So at the end of the day, basically the attendees are the product. So if you wonder where the priorities are in figuring all of this out, I love the idea of you speaking and educating and building trust on stage if you're one of that 3%. And that conference aligns up really, really well with your ideal client profile and prioritized buyer personas in terms of the demographics. There's an incredible amount of sloppiness when it comes to people picking conferences that lines up well with their ideal client profile and their prioritized buyer personas. That's what I call the needle in the haystack kind of investment. The reason this is big is this is the yardstick that a lot of people are using for activity levels and booking meetings. And the reality is, if you invite someone to a cabana party or to play golf with you or to take them to a sporting event like a baseball game or a football game or a soccer match or something like that, you're not educating and building trust. You're just socializing. So is that a meeting, or is that a bribe? Is that a payoff to try to get a future meeting or the inside track on what's really going on? I know one thing for sure, unless you brought out a big workbook and a big curriculum and a professional development experience, which completely ruins the vibe of all the things that you likely invited them to that they see as social and whining and dining, education and trust building is not being accomplished. What I'd encourage you to think about is, in a world where salespeople and marketing people are increasingly being locked out of nearly all of the beginning and the middle stages of the journey, is we have to get past the traditional job titles of marketing, sales enablement, sales development, account executives, and instead reposition those folks on your team to be seen more like teachers and consultants. subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. And this changes the nature of what a meeting actually is. The first foot in the door, if you want to educate and build trust and have a meaningful way of impacting the criteria that they use in your category, that first meeting is probably not a meeting in the traditional sense. That first meeting is more than likely the right person in the right company registering for and attending an educational event that you are speaking at or that one of your coworkers is speaking at. And you don't need huge numbers on this. Small roundtable events with a dozen, 2 dozen, a few dozen people can be wildly impactful. Breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, evening events, same thing where they're learning. They're coming to learn from you in a professional development context. User group meetups, all incredibly, incredibly impactful of inviting the right people from the right companies and being able to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them, because you've educated and built trust with them on a goal, on a challenge, on something that's prioritized for that very specific buyer persona in that kind of company. So again, this is expertise, this is trusted advisorship, and it certainly gets you out of the vendor box where you don't consider a meeting somebody coming and visiting your 10 by 10 piece of carpeting and getting their badge scanned in return for a t-shirt that they're bringing home for their kid. Is that a meeting? I don't know what the heck that is, but that's what someone considers an activity level at this point. What I want you to get to the point is that most of your meetings are the perfect people coming from the perfect companies to learn from you and learn from your subject matter experts. And when you do this well, and the topic is extraordinarily relevant for who they are and what they're working on, they're going to tend to bring their coworkers with them. They may even bring their boss with them. And that's over the course of, let's say it's a monthly series, a monthly breakfast seminar, a monthly lunch and learn, monthly webinar series. That's how you start to make significant progress on stacking the decks in your favor of multiple individuals from that decision committee, seeing your company as having some of the smartest people in the industry when it comes to your category with potential clients. And then when they get to the point where multiple people from that company are learning and growing with you, you're proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of their journey, which we know for any kind of account executive that only meets a prospect at the end and is immediately treading water. Most of their biggest challenge is acting more like a project manager and supporting their internal champion to drive alignment across that team and other teams in the company that are responsible for making a decision on this initiative. When we can do this proactively in a learning and development and professional development context, all of the normal anti-sales, anti-marketing kind of belief systems tend to melt away. All of the cynicism, skepticism of highly educated IT professionals and engineers and developers tends to melt away because they see you as an expert, not as a vendor who's trying to generate a deal and close them on something and book a meeting at all costs by using smoke and mirror deceptions, whatever other SDR venture fueled nonsense was going on over the last 10, 15 years before people realized this whole thing is just insanity, is that we want to focus on deal creation and the right clients as opposed to bribing people and tricking people into booking a meeting with you. This nonsense of people paying for door openers. I don't know what the heck a door opener ever was, but what I observed it to be was a retired or semi-retired executive that was calling in favors from people that they did some things for over the course of their career to try to get a magic introduction to the magic person. But the trust was not transferable. The education was not transferable. You get to this person, it's like, Bob says I should talk to you. What should I talk to you about? Oh, that's interesting. What do you do? What are your goals? What are your like the whole, it's such a disconnect. It's so backwards and bizarre relative to how most people now research and make their purchase decisions in a self-driven world where 83% of this happens without you in the room. And your biggest competition for attention is ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini. But at the end of the day, for setting up meetings with potential clients, the best way to set up meetings with potential clients is you getting to meet multiple stakeholders from that decision committee in a context where they see you and your client-facing team members as experts, as trainers, as consultants, as trusted advisors, long before they're ready to talk about their specific needs and how they could potentially spend money with your company. If your first interaction involves talking to a client about how they're going to spend money with your company, and there's been nothing contextually that set the stage for that, I don't know what to tell you except like, good luck. It's just not how they buy anymore. All of the research, all of the decision making is largely happening without you being in the room, unless you decide that your room is going to be the classroom, unless you decide that you're going to earn your way in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, where you say bye-bye to being seen as an AE and an SDR and an AM and a marketer, and instead be seen as an expert on your category. That's how you get productive meetings with potential clients and proactively drive alignment across that decision committee that's ultimately going to play a huge role on whether that company moves forward with this initiative with your company. And if you've ever thought that you've arrived too late and it feels like you're talking to a wall, you more than likely did arrive too late, and you more than likely are talking to a wall. The key way to get around that is this change in mindset, to stop worrying about vanity metrics, to stop worrying about meetings and badge scans and buying visibility, and to focus on earning visibility by educating and building trust across multiple stakeholders, from the right people in the right companies, in the right places, at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, early and often, is incredibly important to getting past this completely defective notion that meetings are the KPI. Meetings are not the KPI. The KPI, the key performance indicator, the goal is finding good fit clients, good fit partners that can benefit tremendously from your product and service because they look just like other good fit clients and partners who've benefited from your product or service. And you're taking the time to dig the well before you're thirsty, to educate and build trust long before you get to a commercial conversation or what the person asking this question would think of as a meeting. Don't propose marriage on the first date. Don't propose hookup culture. It's like, it's such a turnoff to highly technical, highly skeptical, highly educated IT buyers and engineers and other key stakeholders throughout the data center ecosystem. So educate and build trust, lean into the modern buyer's journey. Those are exactly the steps, the methodologies, the best practices that I'd be thinking about for how to set up data center meetings with potential clients. And that brings us to our final question that we'll be addressing in this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show, which is, and the final question is from the perspective of a data center operator. How does a data center co-location business add AI as a service? So you have a co-location business, you're a co-location data center operator, and you're thinking of adding AI, artificial intelligence, as a service. More than likely, what you're talking about here is buying dozens or hundreds of servers that are loaded up with GPUs and renting this out by the hour to clients that don't want to pay a monthly rental to co-locate their servers in your facility. And at the risk of oversimplifying, if you think being a co-location operator is capital intensive, you ain't say nothing till you think about you buying all of the equipment and specifically the GPUs from NVIDIA and the servers and everything that goes along with that, and running that as a capital expense and charging clients as an operating expense. So in most cases, the companies that are exploring that as an additional line of business, as an additional opportunity, would be better off actually creating a separate entity and a separate brand, because it is so, so, so different than traditional wholesale or retail co-location. In a lot of ways, there's parts of it that more resemble hosting. However, with extreme differences in the capital outlay, the capital intense nature of the hardware that's used to run a traditional bare metal dedicated server VPS kind of business compared to a AI as a service business. So if I was approaching this, I would more than likely want to set up a different entity and set up a different brand and spin it off potentially as a separate sister company, as a separate business, as opposed to potentially betting the co-location business on it. If you've determined that you don't want to be in the co-location business anymore and you're basically shutting that down and moving into AI as a service, that's a different story. But if you're trying to build two commercially viable entities, the level of capital that's required for traditional co-location, as opposed to the level of capital that's required for traditional AI as a service, the unit economics, all of it is so incredibly different. Like the kind of sales approach, the kind of marketing playbook, digital marketing, local marketing, it's so vastly different that I wouldn't recommend trying to bundle those two things together unless you have enormous resources. I would go so far as to say that for any company that's got less than 50 employees or 200 employees or something like that, you want the fastest way to distract yourself into bankruptcy, go in 3 or 4 different directions at the same time and deprioritize the attention that you're paying to marketing and sales and servicing and account management with your core client base. So most of the companies that are AI as a service were born as AI as a service company, in the same way that you 10, 15 years ago were seeing born in the cloud companies. I have not seen a lot of instances of traditional co-location companies that have been around for decades all of a sudden deciding one day that they're going to wake up and they're going to start a separate line of business and put up a separate page on their website that they're running an AI as a service business where they're selling GPUs for a couple dollars an hour or something like that, side by side with selling racks and cabinets for a few $1,000s a month or something like that. So yeah, that's in general how I would approach it. I think it's a completely different CFO. It's a completely different product manager. It's a completely different go-to-market playbook. It's a different ideal client profile. It's different buyer personas. One has to be pretty self-service. The other one doesn't have to be self-service. It's just different. It's interesting. I should put this out there as well. Is in a similar vein, I've noticed in the last 6, 12, maybe as far back as 18 months, I've seen a lot of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin hosting entrepreneurs and sales and marketing folks that are involved in the cryptocurrency ecosystem reach out to me because they're trying to pivot into AI data centers. And it's the same kind of reaction that I have to them, is they're chasing a completely different business opportunity with a completely different kind of ideal client profile, a different kind of addressable market, a different level of community perception. I guess what they both have in common is consuming insane amounts of energy, which definitely is not something that most communities are signing up for you to be able to do. One could have some redeeming social good. The one has less social good. It's such a completely different business model. It's like if someone told me that their co-location business decided next year that they're going to start manufacturing battery backup units. Oh, and the following year after that, they're going to start manufacturing fences for physical security. Now, there are huge conglomerates that could pull off potentially something like this, but the size of companies that typically reach out to me, like for advisory kind of help or engaging in a long-term program or even on the podcast, focus is so incredibly important. And what this usually tells me is if they're reaching out to me about this, there probably is not governance in place or a professional board of directors that ask them like what the heck they're thinking. Because the much more seasoned version of oversight on all of this is going to say exactly that, is that focus on the goals. How is this focusing on the goals? It's a separate kind of business that they didn't necessarily sign up for. Along the same lines, professional services firms don't get the same valuations, don't have the same cap tables, don't have anything that vaguely resembles real estate or that vaguely resembles SaaS. Completely different kinds of business models. So how a data center co-location business can add AI as a service, it's the phrase, someone can tell me if I'm getting the quote wrong. What is it? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Be super careful. I see them as two completely different businesses. Even the companies that present themselves as being both in the web hosting business and in the co-location business, they're usually the high end, the extreme high end of hosting may have similar unit economics to the extreme low end of co-location, but that's about where the similarities stop. And most companies will offer co-location to people that have outgrown hosting so they can keep the revenue in-house. But the reality is very few co-location companies design hosting as a lead generator for co-location. They usually just say that, okay, our entry point for co-location is this. And because of that, that tells us that our sales team, our marketing team shouldn't be spending any time with companies that are smaller than this. And that's just it. We're either going to be in the co-location business or the hosting business. Being in both is a really tricky, precarious place if you consider your primary business co-location. Usually, most of the co-location operators I talk to are a lot more motivated to add lucrative managed services, IT services kinds of businesses, revenue to the stream, as opposed to selling commoditized web hosting that's been commoditized for 10 or 15 years and doesn't add a lot of profitable revenue to their business unless you're doing it on a massive scale. And again, same issue with AI as a service. Unless you're doing it on a massive scale, in the short term, insane amounts of capital to build out those halls, insane amounts of power, insane amounts of expertise relative to the traditional storage and compute workloads that have more than likely put your company on the map. So if you're thinking of taking your data center co-location business and adding AI as a service, talk to your peers, talk to your board, talk to people that have done this before. And I would challenge you to find very many people that have done this successfully as before as the same business. Most of the companies that are starting GPU as a service kind of businesses are doing this as separate businesses. Some of them may have some talent that worked in the co-location space before, but the business model, the unit economics, everything is just so incredibly different. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how a data center co-location business can add AI as a service. It's so much more than just worrying about your ideal client profile and your addressable market and your buyer personas and your lead generation and an educational event strategy. Yes, all of that matters, but it's almost certainly two completely different go-to-market playbooks, two completely different sales and marketing teams, two completely different lead generation strategies and events and nurturing kind of strategies. It's just two different channel partner strategies, so incredibly different. So unless you have a huge company with really deep resources or you're a glutton for punishment, consider this my early warning sign on before you go too much further on this. Do a little bit more diligence on what you're doing with your business model and the financial and the investment side of getting into those two combined businesses that may on the surface appear complementary, but they may not be nearly as complementary as you think they are. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how a data center co-location business can add AI as a service. And that's the final question that we will be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you want to get notified about educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. On our website, you can sign up for free. You can subscribe for free directly at www.dcsmi.com. And this way you'll get notified about upcoming events and resources just like this in your email inbox on Sundays. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming show. I'm Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I also host the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I am the founder and leader of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, DCSMI. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. Just be sure to mention in the note that goes along with the invitation that you watch or that you're a fan of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. Just like you, I get dozens of invitation requests a week, and I usually like to make sure that I'm accepting the right ones for the right reasons. So super important to include that little bit of context there. Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg. Oh, and by the way, if you know someone who'd be great to interview on an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, feel free to reach out to me as well. Again, LinkedIn is more than likely going to be the best channel for that. So we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you great success in growing your team's impact, your company's impact, your impact throughout data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And we look forward to seeing you back next week. Take care now, enjoy the rest of your day, and have a terrific week.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.